Yes, it's recording on my end.
Hi, I'm Beth. I'm a librarian here at Beaverton City Library. And joining me here today is Lindsay Camela, and she's going to do a presentation on navigating with a compass for our How To Fest. Hi, Lindsay.
Hello, how's it going?
Good.
All right, are we ready?
We're ready. Let's do it.
Okay, good. You can see me, you can hear me. Yeah, so my name is Lindsay. I have a background in environmental science in GIS, which is making maps, and I teach the navigation suite of workshops at the downtown Portland location of REI right now. So we're going to jump into a slideshow presentation on the basics of navigating with a compass. So let's go for it. All right, you're good? You got presentation up on your end?
Yep.
All right, sounds good. So I'll let you guys know now that this is going to be the basics. In a half an hour, we can get some stuff talked through, but to really get the hang of using a compass, you're gonna want one in hand with a map and working through exercises. So hopefully this will be some good introductory information and then a little bit of a taste of what you could expect to learn in a hands-on class on map and compass navigation. All right, so this is what we're going to go over. We've got an intro to the foundation of navigation, some basics about compasses as a tool. We're going to talk a little bit about declination. We'll talk through some skills that you can learn and should learn after this. We'll go through some differences in compasses in case you're looking to buy one and start practicing with it. And then I'll give you some resources at the end to kind of keep going. All right, so let's jump into some basics. So there are a few principles of sound navigation, whether you're working with GPS or map and compass. And we at REI like to start off with a principle of staying found. It's a good framework to think about rather than avoiding being lost or what to do just when you get lost. And it might sound cheesy, it might sound really simple and obvious, but it's really the best framework from which to start, okay? Pre-planning is a huge part of navigation. So making sure that you have the right maps. You want to have something that is detailed enough to show the trails and the points of interest that you're gonna be, hiking on or toward. But then you want something that is also zoomed out enough so that you can identify points of interest above the horizon. That's really important if you end up lost and need to get into some triangulation, which we'll talk about at the very end. But planning out your route, knowing that plan really well and letting someone else know what that plan is the first vital step in navigating safely. Keeping your tools close. Your compass and your map should be on your person. There's a lanyard on all the compasses. It's used for attaching to your gear, not necessarily wearing around your neck, but if something should happen where your pack goes down or you get separated from someone else, you should have a map and a compass and you should keep those things close. And you want to be using all of the skills that you learn with a compass to confirm your position early and often, okay? This is one of those, don't wait until you get lost to pull that map out. If you do get lost, because it absolutely happens, you want to make sure that the last place you were positive of your position was, say, a half mile ago or a half an hour ago, rather than when you packed up camp this morning, 6 hours and many, many, many switchbacks beforehand. Most of the time when we see people that get lost, and it absolutely happens every year out here, it's because they wandered off, didn't confirm their position, didn't check, and then kept going past that safe point. So all of these things might sound like basics, but this is the framework that you should keep in the back of your head when you start learning the nitty gritty of compass skills, all right? Does that sound kosher?
All right.
Okay, so we live in an era of amazing technology. Why can't we just use GPS? We've got it on our phones. We have these awesome handheld receivers like you see on the right. And while I think that GPS is a wonderful piece of technology, it is a good addition to a navigation toolkit, not a substitution for the good old-fashioned analog map and compass for these reasons. Never bet your life on a battery. Whether it's in your phone or a receiver like this, you're working with batteries, they run out. You can always carry extras, but it's worse when it's cold. And frankly, it's just not something that I would ever bet my safety on, especially if we're talking about long distance through hiking or hiking off trail in the backcountry. GPS relies on a literal physical line between the antenna of the GPS receiver and a satellite. If you don't have that, if it's blocked by a canyon, if it's blocked by trees, really heavy rain can do it too, then you won't be able to pick up enough satellites to get a position. You need a minimum of 4 and more likely around 10 to get an accurate position. And if you can't pick up 10 satellites in the backcountry, you're not going to have a signal that's accurate enough to get you navigated to where you need to be. And if you're lost, GPS has limitations on getting you back to where you need to be. It really depends on how you set that up at the beginning, whether you even have that ability. So GPS is wonderful, it's evolving all the time, and it should be thought of as an addition, not a substitution. So good old-fashioned map and compass, never gonna go out of style in my opinion. All right, so let's talk about the compass as a tool. Let's dive right in, parts of a compass. You've got your plastic clear base plate. So some things about this, it's going to have some rulers on it. It's going to have this sort of a straight edge, which is really important when you're working with a map. You need it to have these straight edges to it and this corner if you're ever going to triangulate, okay? Some of the simpler models are just the circle. You want to avoid those if you're actually using it for navigation. You've got your rotating bezel and your needle housing here. This part spins and is kind of what makes the compass work. So let's take a closer look at that. So this rotating bezel here has markings on it. You're gonna see your kind of cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. And you're also gonna see numerical markings on there. So it's a 0 to 360 circle. And one of the best things that you can do if you're just getting into compasses is to get used to matching those numbers with the directions. It's one of those really simple common sense things that can help you from getting lost. So if you know, say that you're heading south in the woods and you do some work and you pull a bearing from a map and you're like, okay, I'm gonna go at a bearing of 40 degrees. You should know in your head, wait, that's not right. That 40 is closer to northeast than it is to south. So it's one of those things that when you get in, it's good to kind of familiarize yourself. Worth knowing too that the numbers jump by 2 degrees each time. So you can kind of see it goes, 0, 20, 40, and then in between each of those little tick marks is by 2. So there's a limit to how accurate you can get once you're talking about degrees on a compass. Other parts, you've got this index line, a bearing index line or a bearing index dot. That is either where you are going to be reading the bearing from, or you're going to rotate that bezel and it's where you set a bearing. But know that if you're working with the directions or bearing numbers, that's where you're going to be looking and reading it from, okay? You've got your magnetic needle. This is the whole thing that makes a compass work. Generally, the part that you read is going to be red. The other part is going to be black or some other color. There are some variations between compasses, but generally the big brands out there, and I would say Sunto, Brunton, and Silva are going to be your big 3 names. There's conventions across those companies so that compasses are universal. Think about, say, if your pack went down a ravine and you had to be using your friend's compass, it should be standard enough that you're looking at the same thing. So you want to make sure that you're always looking at the red part of that magnetic needle when you're reading it, okay? Another part to know is this orienteering arrow underneath, okay? It's where you're generally going to line up that magnetic needle when you're working with the compass. It's also referred to as the shed. So if you ever hear somebody say, put red Fred in the shed, that means you're going to line up that magnetic needle with that orienteering arrow. Another thing to look at is just these orienteering lines underneath. They're kind of these straight up and down lines with one usually perpendicular line here. You use those when you're working with the map on a compass, and we'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. So those are the basic parts. If you get a new compass, make sure you can read yours and you know what all the little parts do. All right, so there's something called good compass posture. You can either read a compass in your hand or you can put it down on a flat level surface like the ground, but there are a couple of things that you always want to make sure you're doing. Compass should always be level. You never want to hold it up like a smartphone. It's becoming more and more common to watch people out in the woods with it kind of straight up and down, but you want to try to avoid that as much as possible. And you want to get used to moving your entire body rather than just moving the compass in your hand. So here's a little quick video of somebody demonstrating pretty decent compass posture. You might need to move your zoom faces around to see this, but you can see he's moving his whole body. He's keeping it flat, even when he's rotating the bezel. So that's just good, simple, how to kind of work with your compass in a 3D space. So compasses work, that magnetic needle works because the center of our Earth is made of an iron core, which is a magnetic metal. Not all metal is magnetic, but any metal which is magnetic has the ability to affect a compass and throw it off. So think about the types of things out in the real world or out on the trail that might affect your compass, okay? So the first picture I have up here is gear. This right here is a magnetic holder for a hydration vest bite valve. And if you had a compass close enough to that, that's absolutely enough to throw that needle off. Water bottles, your cell phone, any other piece of metal gear has the ability to affect a compass. What I recommend to everybody is test your gear before you go. You should, wave your gear in front of that compass, and you'll notice if it starts moving really fast, then that gear is something that you should either switch out with something maybe plastic, or you just want to put it aside when you're using your compass in the field. Picnic tables. I know it's pretty obvious there's a whole bunch of metal underneath them, but a lot of times a picnic table is the only level elevated surface you're going to see for a while in the backcountry. It's really tempting to just throw your map down and start working, but obviously you want to avoid those. Power lines. Small power lines in a city or a town aren't going to do much to your compass, but these big guys like this absolutely have the ability to throw off a compass. And a lot of times you get trails out in the backcountry that run right along these power lines because it's area that's cleared consistently. So know that you're going to have to walk maybe a good quarter mile away from these to get an accurate reading from your compass. Sidewalk. Again, you might have a little sidewalk pad at a trailhead. It's a level surface. It's tempting. Don't do it. There's rebar in your sidewalk and other concrete structures. And the last thing, there's probably a couple of others, but one of the big things in Oregon to think about is volcanic soil and rock. Not really applicable in other parts of the country, but in our central Oregon area, that kind of Central Lakes Cascade area in, outside of Bend, we have a lot of volcanic soil, and that is absolutely enough to throw off a compass. So this would be a situation in which taking a GPS receiver is an absolutely great idea as an addition to your navigation toolkit. So moving on, let's talk about declination. This is something that can be a little bit overwhelming. It's a little bit into the science nitty-gritty. So if after a few slides you're still confused and like, oh God, that's a lot, take your time. There are many really good videos on YouTube that dive into what declination is and how it relates to using a compass. So this is just a real brief overview. So what is it? What it is, what declination is the difference between true north and magnetic north, okay? True north is the fake pole at the top of our Earth where we say Santa lives and around which the Earth spins, okay? Magnetic north is the place where our compasses point. We use true north to make maps because magnetic north moves, okay? In the early 20th century, it was moving a few meters a year. Currently, it is moving a few kilometers a year. And even just a few meters a year is absolutely enough to throw off making accurate maps. And right now it's moving way too fast. Geoscientists don't quite know why our southern magnetic pole is not moving at nearly the same rate. So it's something that is being actively studied, but it's enough that it's kind of interesting to be in the field right now. So declination is an angle. It's that angle of difference between true and magnetic north, and so it's measured in degrees, either east or west. On this side of the country, on the west coast, our declinations are all east. On the other side of the country, declinations are west, okay? And it's a little bit easier when you're kind of looking at a map and using your compass to kind of see that, but I love teaching in Portland because we have a really great pictorial visual representation of the difference between true north and magnetic north. So this is downtown Portland here. Everything north of Burnside, which is this road right here, is laid out on true north. Everything south of Burnside is laid out on magnetic north. And you can see that difference is an angle. You've got that angle right there, and that's declination, okay? So say you're hiking around here, or you're hiking somewhere completely different, how do you figure out what the declination is? What I do, so every good map will have a declination marking on it, but maps are only as good as the data upon which they're based. And at this point now, if you have a map that's based on data about 5 years old, it is off enough where that declination is wrong. And it is not unusual for maps to be 5 years old, 10 years old. Some of the federally made, say, USGS maps are based on data even older than that. So what I do is I go to Google, I type in declination calculator. The first couple of websites that pop up are all from NOAA, so the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And what you do is you pop in a street address or a city, and then it auto-populates this field over here. It gives you a lat long. You hit calculate, and then it gives you your declination over here. All right, and it gives it as 15 degrees, 8 minutes. Easy conversion that you can do right there to put it into decimal degrees that are a little bit easier to kind of understand as a human being. So 15.1 degrees is your declination, and I measured that from the downtown REI. So that is the angle of difference between true north and magnetic north. All right.
I've got a question for you then, Lindsay. If you're using a map that's 5 years old, is your suggestion to ignore its declination and do it based on what you've just shown here? You can absolutely use that map, but you can't pay attention to its declination?
Yeah. So for example, if you grabbed a good green trails map of the Pacific Northwest right now, and it was based on 2015 data, it's going to list the declination of the Portland area as 15.6 degrees. So when I'm calculating it for right now and today, it's coming up as 15.1 degrees. This is where, when you think back to the fact that that compass increases by 2 degrees each time, the idea that you can dial in the difference between 15.1 and 15.6 is slightly negligible, but because magnetic north is changing like it is, it's important, I think, just to go online. It's the easiest way to do it. And, you know, it's going to be more reliable than whatever was put on that map when it was made.
So you're saying I don't have to throw out my maps necessarily, I just need to do this calculation?
Nope, because your maps are still based on true north.
Okay, of course.
And that's what we're trying to account for here. So good segue, actually. Why does that matter? What do we do? How do we deal with this? You can do math in the backcountry. So what you would have to do is take 15 and be adding it or subtracting it, depending on what you were trying to do in the backcountry. And I know I don't like to do math in my head at the best times. So think about being on the trail, being hot, being thirsty, God forbid, being lost. That's not the time to be doing math. So what you want is a compass where you can adjust the declination. So it's a kind of blurry picture, but basically the different brands do it different ways. But what you do is you adjust the compass to account for declination so that the magnetic needle is going to do the only thing that it can do and still point toward magnetic north, while the rest of the compass is oriented toward true north. Okay, so once you set it, as long as you're not going a really far distance, you set it, you forget it, and then that compass now matches your map and allows you to do what you're going to do. Okay, this is one of those skills that easier to walk through when you have a compass in your hand, but it's something to start thinking about if you're going to be, you know, navigating with a map and compass. All right, so moving on, going to give a brief overview of the skills that you could expect to learn if you take a full-on hands-on compass class, whether it's at REI, whether it's through outdoor school, or whether you're gonna go down a rabbit hole of YouTube videos after this. So if we're going through and it sounds a little bit fast, you know that you're gonna have to work on some of these skills and really practice them before you totally get them. So all compass skills are based on bearings. What the heck is a bearing? It's just a direction. So you can give it in terms of right and left. Say, go down to Holgate, make a left, go down to 52nd, and then make a right, you're there. It can also be given with a cardinal direction. So say, take this trail north to the stream. Once you hit that, turn east, northeast. Not bad, but not as accurate as we want to be out in the field. So a good bearing, a good set of directions when you're talking about working with a map and compass, it's gonna have three things: a starting point, a numerical bearing, and a distance. So we're coming up to mushroom season, and not that people generally share the locations of the mushrooms that they find, but think about going to a farm and finding something where it's like, okay, at the junction of trail X and Y, you're gonna go at a bearing of 120 degrees for a quarter mile, and that's where all the good mushrooms are. That's what you would want, and that's something that you can actually do work in the backcountry with. So those are the three things that you wanna pay thinking about when you're talking about bearings. But in simplicity, it's just a direction. So one of the simplest things you can do with a compass is set a bearing and follow it. So what you would do is take your compass, having already accounted for declination, you rotate the bezel to the desired bearing. So you line up that number with that bearing index line, and then you're going to move your entire body until the magnetic needle aligns with the orienteering arrow. You move your entire body until red Fred is in the shed. And then that direction of travel arrow is out in front of you and you follow it. Simple as that for the most part. Little pictorial representation of what you're doing. So you can see somebody's dialed in a bearing of, gosh, what is that, 338-ish. They have moved their entire body until that red magnetic needle is lined up with the orienteering arrow underneath. And then they're going to be following the direction of travel arrow out in front, okay? Simplest thing you can do with a compass.
Yeah, when you put it like that, it does look simple.
Right? This one is pretty darn easy. So taking a field bearing is something else that you can do. And generally what this is trying to figure out what direction something is in relation to you. So something else to know about bearings, they are always relative, okay? From Portland, Mount Hood is roughly southeast. From John Day, from Prineville out in that part of the state, Mount Hood is going to be roughly southwest, okay? So bearings are always relative. So when you're taking a field bearing, you are saying, what is that thing, what direction is that thing in relation to where I am right now, okay? And how you do that generally is you aim that direction of travel arrow at the point of interest, you rotate the bezel then until red Fred is in the shed. And then you pick up your compass and you read the bearing, and then that gives you that direction. Okay, so here's how it looks here. So you've got this peak on your map over here, Castle Peak. You can see it in the real world, it's up there. You aim your direction of travel arrow at it, and while your compass is level, you rotate this bezel here until the magnetic needle lines up with the orienteering arrow, or until red Fred is in the shed. And then at that point, you can pick up the compass and read that bearing at the bearing index line, okay? So this is a skill that is useful for a couple of different reasons. It's a skill you want to get very good at if you feel you will ever need to triangulate, which we'll get to in just a couple of seconds, but worthwhile skill to go around and practice. So orienting your map to reality. This is one of the things that was in the description, so let's go over how to do this. And it's useful for a few different reasons. So imagine that you have written down directions. I do this as a trail runner all the time. Say, take this trail 2 miles, make a right, take that 3 miles, yada, yada. And all of a sudden you get out to that juncture and you have one trail going off to your right at this angle, and then all of a sudden there's another trail off to your right at a different angle that wasn't on your initial map. Which one do you take? Orienting your map to reality is a really good way of figuring that out. It's also good just depending on how you learn. I'm a very visual person. If you spin me around on a trail, I can't tell you what direction I'm facing. My wife has an amazing sense of direction. I do not. That is why I have these tools and I learn these skill sets so that I don't have to rely on something that I don't have innately. So this one's pretty simple, actually. All you do is, after you've accounted for declination and you've dialed it in, you set your compass bearing to north, or 0, 360. Those are all the same bearing. You set that up, and on a level surface, which is usually the ground, somewhere level on the ground, you line up the straight edge of the compass with any north-south line of the grid on the map. And every good topo map will have a grid system on it. And all you have to do is line up the straight edge with that on the map. And then you rotate the entire combination until red Fred is in the shed. And at that point, your map is oriented to reality. And then it is much easier to go, okay, I can see this line on the map, this trail on the map, that one goes off at that angle, that other one doesn't go off that angle. Now I kind of have a better idea of where I'm at. So this is kind of what it looks like in practice. You've got, you see your magnetic needle is pointing off towards magnetic north, but you have true north dialed in at your bearing right here. And then you've got the straight edge of the compass lined up with the straight edge on the map. You could also use this line right here if you wanted, just any good north-south grid line on that map. And then it's a really silly animation, but this is what you would do. You would rotate the entire thing until that red magnetic needle is lined up with the orienteering arrow, okay? So this is a good basic skill to learn. It's good to teach other people. It's a really good one to show kids kind of, you know, how to navigate and what, you know, kind of maps do to represent the real world. All right, 2 final skills I'm gonna kind of just gloss over because they are pretty advanced skills, but how do we get the bearings to know where we're going? One of the ways you can do it is pulling it from a map, okay? And I think this one is actually easier to understand from this picture. So suppose we're here, we recognize our campsite on the map up here, and we wanna know what direction, how do we dial in a bearing and get there? What bearing do we put in? We can pull that information from this map. So what you do is you put your compass along, you line up the straight edge from point A, where you are, to point B, where you want to go. Then what you do, make sure that direction of travel arrow is pointed toward point B, okay? If you don't, you'll end up with a reading that is 180 degrees off of where you want to go. So always be traveling towards point B, where you want to go. And then what you're going to do is rotate the bezel until those orienteering arrows, those red kind of faint lines, until those line up with the north-south grid of the map, okay? So this one definitely takes a little practice, a little bit of kind of working through exercises to get, but then what you do is you read the bearing there, and then that's the bearing you need to get from point A to point B, okay? So this is a skill that you can actually do before you ever go out on the trail because it doesn't require that magnetic needle. It just requires your compass to match the grid of the map. So this is something that is part of that pre-planning. You do this every time you're gonna make a turn out in the wild, and then you can double check that to help you confirm your position when you're actually out on the trail or if you're off trail and doing something like that. So this one takes a lot of practice and working through, but it's the one that I would say I use the absolute most out of any other compass skill. So triangulation is the last one, also a very advanced skill, also something which I have never used in real life, and I hope never to have to outside of practicing it. This is the skill that you would use if you were actually lost. I'm gonna walk you through the basics of it, but this is definitely something hands-on practice is absolutely key. The idea is that you are somewhere on this map and you don't quite know where, but you can see something on your map, say this Castle Peak, you can see it on your map and you can see it in real life. What you do is you take a field bearing of that peak, you put the corner of your compass, having dialed in that bearing, you put the corner of your compass on that point of interest and you rotate the entire compass around that axis of the point until your north-south lines line up with the grid. And what you do then is you draw a line along the straight edge. And the idea is that there is no other place you could be than along that line to be able to get that field bearing of that peak, okay? So if you shoot that peak and it's at a bearing of 220 degrees, there's nowhere, and you do that with the map, there's nowhere else you could be than along this line, somewhere along this line, and get that field bearing, okay? And the idea is, say that if you can take that bearing and you know you're on a trail, the intersection of those 2 points is where you're gonna end up. Ideally, you have 3 points, okay? And you would do this 3 times, you would draw 3 lines, and then that would give you either a pure intersection or a triangle. So definitely something to practice and go into more depth with, but triangulation is the thing that you'd want to practice in case you ever get lost. So the last thing I have for you before I say goodbye is, okay, I want to practice, I want to go buy a compass, what do I buy? So 3 major differences between all of them. This is a simple intro version, inexpensive, you're looking at between $10 and $25, but there's no ability to do a just declination. All that thing can do is point towards north. It's good for a kid who's just learning. If you want to go and actually be able to navigate with a compass though, what you want is at least this sort of a simple model here. It has the ability to adjust declination, which is just absolutely key, and it has that straight edge on the base plate for you. So this is the one that we use in our classes, about $45 at most places, somewhere in that range. The next thing that you can get as a feature in a compass is a mirror. And what a mirror allows you to do is to take more accurate field bearings. If you think about aiming your compass at something, you want to hold it up high so that you get the most accurate reading, but then how do you read the actual compass? What you do is you drop that mirror down, read it off of the mirror. They can also be used in kind of search and rescue situations. You can always bounce light off of it, and then you can look at what you look like when you're backpacking too, which is always fun. These are your basics. I always recommend people either go with the second or the third option. Other thing to know is that all of these come in global versions, which are balanced for both hemispheres. Those are going to add a little bit of money to the price. You're looking at somewhere around $100 for a global compass. So it depends on what sort of work you're going to be doing and where you're going as to what exactly you need. But I would say first step, go grab one, grab a good map, and keep going with your education. So if you head over to rei.com/learn, that is where all of our class information can be found. We're currently not doing any in-person classes. We're hoping to pick that up as soon as everything kind of gets a little bit better in the world, but there's also really good tutorials, videos, pictures. You can walk yourself through a lot of this information from rei.com/learn. The WikiHow on how to use a compass is also excellent. And then I went through and I watched basically the first 10 or so videos on YouTube. If you just kind of search intro, compass, navigation, anything like that, they're all really good and from a lot of different sources. So you can kind of see this information presented in a few different ways. So these are the basics. I would encourage everybody to keep learning and keep practicing. It's definitely a skill set that it's use it or lose it. It's very easy to forget 6 months after, when you're actually in the field. So if you want these skills, keep using them. And I hope you do. And I hope when we start teaching in-person classes, I get to see some folks out there.
Thank you so much, Lindsay.
Yeah.
That was fantastic information, and you definitely made me want to learn more and practice these things.
Heck yeah.
And I'm excited for when you can start offering those in-person classes again, because that's going to be the best way to get the practice that we need, right?
Yeah. Keep up on the website. I know they brought back all of our regional folks who help organize and run our workshops. So we're just trying to figure out, the how of getting people back and learning. So.
All right. Well, thanks again, and keep learning, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Beth.